Hi, I am Stephanie Avery. I'm a Toronto-based artist and interventionist and mischief maker. I do a lot of work kind of with or on top of found objects that I salvage from around the city. I work a lot with humor first, and then I kind of use that to lead into greater conversations about public space and housing and a lot of the issues that really affect artists in Toronto, and I think most people in Toronto and everywhere, honestly, these days. So I grew up in the Ottawa suburbs in like the most nuclear family, middle class, single income, 2 children, no dog. But aside from that, very kind of typical TV suburban upbringing. And you wouldn't think based on that I would necessarily go into the arts, and certainly not into arts that really question rules and authority and are just kind of critical in general. And I think about this quite a bit, about how I grew up and how it influenced my art practice. There's no doubt that I was ever going to become an artist, right? Like that was pretty obvious from the beginning, and there was never any pushback when, it was time to go to university and I wanted to get a degree in visual art for, whatever good that was. But I think a lot about my relationship to rules and rule breaking, and how in my house growing up, when I would get in trouble, it never really had to do with whether or not I broke a rule, and had a lot more to do with the mood that my parents were in. I think between that and then in general, them really teaching me to be a critical thinker, it made me question rules and breaking them and what those mean and consequences and why some rules are in place and why they affect some people more than others and things like that. Supportive, 100%. I mean, not when I was a kid and getting in trouble for drawing and everything. I don't think they liked that very much. But when I wanted to study artwork, yeah, they were very supportive in their mind. So long as I could have a roof over my head and food in my fridge, they're just like, do what makes you happy. You do you, follow your dreams. My mom in particular loves living vicariously through me. She's thrilled that I have my crazy life of art and traveling and adventures and weirdness, and we often joke about how I haven't been arrested yet for any of the work that I've done, or that one of these days she's going to get a call me asking her to bail me out of prison. They know everything that I do, and they get a real kick out of it. I would say my mom is very creative, but she's never had a place to channel that creativity. And my dad is a computer programmer, which is I would say a different kind of creativity, but not necessarily artistic. So I was very lucky in Ottawa. I went to the art high school, so that was a really nurturing place for me. I would say I learned a lot more about art in high school than I ever actually did in my university program. To answer your question, I was making a lot of really fun, really weird, slightly uncomfortable artwork in high school. I think I've had a pretty good grasp on the person who I am since I was pretty young, and of course I've evolved and changed since I was a teenager, but at the core I feel like I'm still kind of the same person. So I think teenage me would really enjoy the artwork that adult me is making. I would say university was actually a regression for me, because high school was a pretty intense art program, a lot of very straightforward teachers. I respond really positively to just like direct feedback, direct constructive criticism. I really appreciate that and like that. And when I went to York, especially in the first couple of years, there was no separation of majors and non-majors in the art classes. So from an educational perspective, I was not learning anything that I hadn't learned when I was 14, my grade 9 year of high school. And then with grading, with critiquing and all of that, you kind of have to involve everybody if it's a class that includes majors and non-majors. So you're kind of teaching to the lowest common denominator in those cases. So I felt educationally it was a big setback for me. It wasn't until in my 3rd and 4th year where I was finally taking maybe 3 classes that I found actually challenging and engaging. And until those, I just was such a completely underwhelming student. I think if any of my profs remember me, which I'm sure that they do not, because there's no reason why they would. I'm probably the last person out of all of their students who they would expect to still be practicing all these years later. When I was in university, in my 4th year, I did a class on installation artwork, and I made an art installation entirely out of human teeth, which I still bring out every now and then because it's such a wonderful art installation. There's between 500 and 600 teeth in it, and they all hang down from the ceiling. They're on strands of dental floss, of course. There's between 1 and 8 teeth per strand, and I hang them in kind of a grid formation from the ceiling, but because of the way they're staggered on the dental floss, there's a lot of randomness to it. So when you're standing further away from the installation, it kind of looks like a pristine snowfall that's being stopped in time and space. It's really beautiful. And then you get up close and you realize that you're looking at literally hundreds of human teeth. And there's so much that goes through a viewer's head when they make that realization, because of course it's beautiful, but it's also just like abject and unsettling. And that's a line that I often try to walk with my artwork, is something that is both like beautiful and whimsical and funny, but also deeply uncomfortable. My studio is in a shipping container. It's 8 feet wide by 20 feet long. There are, I think, 10 shipping containers on this property. Each one of them is an artist's studio. And then there's also a building on this property, which is more studios inside, and a bathroom, and a kitchenette, and a little art gallery space. I really enjoy having my art studio in a shipping container. I would say it's not great in the winter because it's not super well insulated, but in the summer, it's awesome. I have my door open, and with my studio space in particular, I've kind of created something that is a combination of an art studio and an art gallery, and I really love the idea that I'm public facing, so when I'm here I can have my door open, and people who are passing by or people who know that I'm here on certain days, they can just come in and they can see what I'm working on, they can talk to me about my artwork, they can see what's up on the walls. Right now I'm doing mostly art interventions, mostly with found objects or reappropriating spaces. A lot of my big paintings, which you can see right behind me here, these are actually on advertisements that used to be in bus shelters and public ad boxes around the city. So I get my hands on those and I paint directly on them. I change, the models or the products to be completely absurd and hilarious, and it's meant to be critical of consumer culture, of the nefarious aspects of consumer culture and public space and who gets to use it and why, why is it okay for these ads to be in public space, but if a street artist puts something up, then that gets to be punished. A lot of the street ads we have around Toronto are technically illegal, and yet we're very comfortable with seeing those. Nobody really questions those being there, but there's a lot of dialogue about the legalities behind something like graffiti, vandalism, street art, things like that. Then with other interventions, so I've recently started a collective of other interventionists. We don't really have a name yet, but we've been working together on a few projects where we transform liminal public spaces. So we just made the Parkdale Provincial Park back in December, and that was kind of a sequel, a follow-up to a project called Bloordale Beach, which one of my collaborators was responsible for, which is just an amazing, beautiful project all around public space. And so we've done kind of a similar thing, but in Parkdale with this big empty lot. There used to be an LCBO there. It got closed in 2015. It's supposed to be affordable community housing. It's just an empty lot. They demolished the LCBO. Nothing has happened there. 2015 is a long time ago. We are desperate for community housing. So Sherry, who did the Bloordale Beach, brought this idea to us of, okay, she wants to do something in that area. We brainstormed an idea and we turned it into the Parkdale Provincial Park, just to, one, have fun with it, do something really whimsical with literally just an empty lot that people use to walk their dogs, and kind of make a statement about the lack of public space, the lack of parks, especially in Parkdale. I think there'd be more based on the name, but no. And about housing and the complete lack thereof, and how that's obviously not a priority in the city. But using humor first, using play first, having fun with it, making people laugh, and then having that conversation about spacing. I mean, certainly with my ad paintings, there's like a very clear line of how when I started these to where I am now. And they started as I would just tear pages out of magazines and basically paint on those as a warm-up for other paintings, like a warm-up exercise to like loosen up my brain and loosen up my wrists and get into the painting headspace. And they were a lot rougher than what I do now. Now when I do them, even on the magazine pages, which I still do, they're meticulous and I spend hours and hours and hours painting them. But back then, when I first started, it was just like, bam, paint on there, done. How can I draw a funny creature interacting with the products and models? So AdHacks are basically what you're seeing behind me here, where I hack ads, but it's also a play on the word ad hoc, which is kind of like making up some nonsense as you go. and I think that that title really embodies both of those things, that there are a lot of nonsense involved in the work that I'm doing. And, you know, when I'm painting on these, most of the time I don't know what I'm doing until I've started painting it. And I just like to see what comes out. So it's a very ad hoc process for me, but I love a pun. So it works on multiple levels, and that makes me very happy. On the rare occasion that I do show these in more mainstream art spaces, like at the Artist Project, a lot of people come through who work in advertising, who are, you know, art directors and things like that. And I would say, generally speaking, that they're the ones who appreciate this artwork the most. They love it because I kind of do what they wish they could. So when I get my ads, let's just say I got a guy who gets me my ads, and so I don't have a lot of choice over the ads that I get. It's kind of I get what I get, but that's okay because I mean they're so rich. I'm so inspired by basically wanting to take the piss out of them. And so with this one, I got this and I was like, yes, this is amazing. I absolutely have to do something ridiculous with this. And so how this process starts is I will just sit in front of it for like an hour, just thinking about what I want to do with it. You know, sometimes, especially ads that have people in them, sometimes I change their faces. Sometimes I make it so that they're holding something. Sometimes it's a combination of both. Sometimes I'm inspired by a slogan. Sometimes I'll just start painting and see what happens. And so with this one, I knew that I wanted to change their faces. I knew that I had to keep Rachel's hair. That was very important, the iconic hair. And then, yeah, I just kind of painted over all of the characters. I started off in white and I just kind of played around with the shapes of their limbs and their faces. And I love to paint a weird hand. I love hands. I love fingers. So many artists hate painting those, but I love making them just like way too long and way too many fingers. So yeah, I just kind of started and let it go organically. You know, some decisions I made when I started painting, like Joey over here, was not originally coming out of Phoebe's neck, but when I painted over his head, his shirt totally disappeared, his body totally disappeared, and it like didn't even make sense to have this like weird floating head there. So suddenly he's growing out of Phoebe's neck. Often I'll step away at the end of a day of painting and be like, brain, where did that come from? process makes me really happy because, you know, it's like a discovery process for me as well, not knowing exactly what it's going to be until it's done. And then I laugh and laugh. I would say I'm a person who tries to collect experiences. You know, I don't try to own a lot of things. I don't buy a lot of things for myself, but I love experiencing new things. So that draws me to traveling quite a bit, which is nice because then I can find abandoned buildings and photograph them. Like urban exploration is a huge interest of mine, although it's related to my artwork. I have a whole photography body of work that's around that, but that came after I started discovering and loving abandoned buildings. I love abandoned buildings. I think they're just beautiful. Around Toronto, there's not a lot of those, but yeah, that's why it's mostly a travel hobby for me now. There's a really amazing community of people who do urban exploration. So usually when I travel, I will reach out to urban explorers who live in that part of the world. You know, I'll send them a link to my work so that they know that it's something I've done before, because there's nothing worse in this community to being someone who's never done it before, who doesn't really have a proven track record of not like trashing places or treating them disrespectfully. You know, you get a message from some person who's just like, hey, I'm trying this for the first time. Can you tell me how to get into the best abandoned buildings in your area? Because they're really sacred spaces to us. And so I reach out to other urban explorers and other photographers. I introduce myself. I say, hey, I'm Stephanie. I'm from Toronto. I'm visiting your part of the world. Do you want to hang out and go to some abandoned buildings together? And I would say that like 50% of the time, people are just like, yeah, absolutely, let's hang out, because people are always excited to meet other people who share that passion, and they get to show off something really cool to somebody who is also passionate about that. It's great. And then sometimes if they can't come out with me, if we can't coordinate, they won't necessarily tell me where there are good buildings or how to get inside, but they'll kind of hint at it. I do a lot of research into places. So I found out about, you know, entire ghost towns that I was able to photograph just from researching online. And sometimes I just get lucky. Sometimes I'm just walking around and suddenly I'm in front of a giant abandoned factory and I can't not go in. I got into muraling relatively recently. I'm honestly really surprised that I didn't get into it earlier because of my interest in public space and artwork being accessible and how we interact with public space. I'm friends with a lot of graffiti artists and muralists through so many different avenues in my life. And a good friend of mine, June Kim, she organizes these mural laneway jams. And she did one that was, it was pairing experienced muralists with aspiring muralists. And I applied to that. And so she took me on, she became my mentor for this project. I have a lot of experience painting, and she convinced me to paint this mural with aerosol. And I had never picked up spray paint ever in my life. And I was like, you're my mentor. I will happily do this. And I got hooked immediately. I loved it. It was such a huge challenge, and I love a challenge. And so that kind of kicked off what I'm now doing, which is I'm painting a lot more murals. Last summer, I got access to an abandoned building. I had permission for once to be in an abandoned building that I was allowed to basically use as my three-dimensional sketchbook. So all of last summer, I had a space where I could bring my paint. I could leave it there. It was secure enough that I could leave it there, and I could come in about once a week and just practice spray painting. So through that, I was able to really hone my skills, and now I'm a muralist. I do spray painting. My art journey, a lot of that is about me just saying yes to the opportunities that come my way. And it's also about me making the opportunities for myself. I'm obviously not somebody who likes to ask for permission to do things, and that extends to a lot of the interventions that I've done, to events that I have created, where it's like, if we want to create artwork in Toronto, if we want to be creative in Toronto, we can't wait for someone to give us permission to do that. We just have to do that. So it's really been, in part, self-actualized, and in part just kind of seeing where the world takes me. And it's taken me to a lot of crazy places and to a lot of amazing projects. And honestly, I don't know where it's going to take me next. Definitely there's a lot more muraling in my future. I know that for sure. And there's always more ideas. I'm not one to sort of sit still.